Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'll just give a minute or two here for everybody to join in and get settled, and then we'll dive right into today's topic. Okay, we'll get started today and let everybody join as we keep going. And it's just my first 5 minutes of opening, so that's not the worst to miss. Margaret, can you go forward, please? I would like to start today by acknowledging that we are all joining from across Canada today, and BRC and myself are located in Treaty 7, the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and it is also home to Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. As I said, though, we are all joining from across the country and in different places and have our own unique connection to the land. So I'd really encourage everybody to jump into the chat and let everybody else know where you're joining from today as we take into this virtual environment. Going forward, Margaret. So I will not take that 10 minutes. I should really change that. I don't think I've ever gone more than 5, but just a quick introduction for me before we jump into why everybody is here to hear more from Leigh-Anne on what Nova Scotia is doing on clean energy procurement. Forward. But first, I'd really like to thank our sponsors for this event. EDF Renewables has sponsored our events through the entire year. Blue Earth Renewables and Res Group have sponsored today's event, and we could not put on these events or have the amazing programming that we do without the support of our sponsors. So thank you very much. Just quickly, as it's a public webinar, this one, there might be a few of you who don't know, but I wanted to run down what BRC is. BRC is a double-sided network that focuses on education and corporate power procurement. We have both developer and intermediary members and buyer members. Our primary focus is on providing educational resources to the buyers and helping them move forward in their procurement journey. We also offer networking events and then educational webinars like the one we're on today. Forward, Margaret. Just a quick highlight of our deal tracker here as we hit the Q3 and have passed 2022's total for corporate procurement. That's a great sign as it's slowing down near the end of the year here. We're excited to see that we hit over the 2022 target. And as you can see there, the PPA market is currently representing $5.5 billion in investment with over 6,000 jobs by Q3. So just a great sign of where we're going on corporate procurement in the country. And hopefully we're going to start seeing deals from Nova Scotia added into this and drive that total up. So let's go forward. Just a quick highlight of the BRC community. We have members, as I said, from both the developer and the buyer side across industries, from Amazon to Starbucks and into our silver. And go forward, Margaret. So if at the end of this webinar you would like to reach out to BRC, hear a little bit more about what we do, or have a conversation with me, please, you can join our newsletter on the website. That's one of the best things I recommend. You get one email from us a month. We try not to spam your inbox, and you have highlights from across the corporate procurement and renewable energy space. Well, also, it's a chance for us to send out our blog series each month where we do short little blogs on topics either directly related to corporate procurement or adjacent to it, just to bring you guys a little information as you end out the month. And we can go forward. One thing I do want to highlight, if you are in Calgary next week, and it's a week of conferences, but the Pembina Institute is holding the 2023 Alberta Climate Summit on October 26th. Tickets are still available. We have a full round of sessions, everything from looking at jobs and energy transition to the future of oil and gas and what a net zero grid means. Forward, Margaret. then that brings us to why we're really here. None of that intro is why anybody was here, and I understand that. So let's go forward again, Margaret, and I can introduce Leigh-Anne Thurber. Leigh-Anne has been working for Nova Scotia's Department of Natural Resources and Renewables for more than 6 years. She's worked on marine renewable energy policy and programs before moving into her current space in the electricity policy. She's worked closely with Coho climate advisors to develop and refine the most recent rate-based procurement request for proposals, the largest single action the Nova Scotia government has ever undertaken to reduce greenhouse gases. I mean, if you want a great line, that is right there. She also has led the development and design of the Green Choice program, which we're all here to learn more about. So with that, I'm just going to dive right in and give it to Leigh-Anne. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Jordan, and thanks so much to BRC Canada for the opportunity to highlight a little bit about what's going on here in Nova Scotia, both from a broad context, which I will cover today, as well as a little bit of an extra focus on the Green Choice program. Just want to do a bit of housekeeping and just say that there are opportunities at the end for some lots of questions. So Q&As, if folks want to drop them into the chat, I believe Margaret will be able to sort of monitor and let me know as they're coming through. If there's anything as I'm speaking in particular that you want me to clarify, that would be great, Margaret, if you could let me know, just so that while we're on the topic, I don't want anyone to miss that opportunity. And then at the end, there's lots of time for sort of a Q&A, sort of informally. Please feel free to ask any questions you want. Let's have a conversation about what's going on here in Nova Scotia. So again, thanks everyone for joining me. I will apologize if my voice gives out. I am recovering from a cold, so you will see me taking sips of my nice hot water, lemon, and tea over here to keep myself hydrated and hopefully not coughing in your ear. If I do take a pause, I'll try to put myself on mute so I'm not bursting your eardrums with my cough. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of context about what it looks like here in Nova Scotia, some of the motivators, drivers, as well as what the electricity system looks like. Next slide, please. So really what we're talking about from a policy standpoint here in Nova Scotia is how we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as part of climate change mitigation here in Nova Scotia. So key to understanding the current context is understanding where our emissions come from. So most of our emissions come from the electricity sector. It is still largely reliant on coal and other fossil fuels for the base energy, as well as a follow-up or runner-up is our transportation system, including the marine transportation system, which is a unique part of course, living in the Maritimes, and also includes home heating. So a lot of our homes here in Nova Scotia are still heavily reliant on home heating oil. So our transition in the province and my current clean energy division within the Natural Resources and Renewables department is actually divided by these three sectors. So myself and several others work on the electricity side. We have a team that's devoted for transportation as well as active transportation, and then a team that's devoted on home heating oil or looking at buildings. Next slide, please. So part of what is motivating some of the changes in some of the recent programs and initiatives here in Nova Scotia is in and around our objectives. And some of these are set in law, some of them are in regulation, and some are in the climate plan that we have here in Nova Scotia. So I'm just going to provide a quick overview, to folks. So really, what are our goals? The overarching goal, of course, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and I mentioned where they're largely coming from. There's a heavy focus on sort of generating rural green jobs. About half the population in Nova Scotia actually lives in rural Nova Scotia, and the other half lives here in sort of Metro Halifax. We also want to be inclusive in our economic development, which would include rural folks, as well as considerations for the Mi'kmaq, as well as other sort of equity deserving groups. We really want to, and opportunities like this allow us to elevate the Nova Scotian leadership in climate change mitigation. So this is a wonderful opportunity, and I appreciate it so much to be able to say, what we're doing and talk a little bit more. So I mentioned a little bit about social equity and really trying to look at different mechanisms that we can bring in equity deserving groups as part of the transition off of fossil fuels here in Nova Scotia. And that is everything from partnership and ownership structures in electricity projects to considering specific streams in our current sort of funding programs, specific or targeted engagement with sort of some populations that may have not been as engaged in the electricity sector or in other sort of climate change discussions previously, as well as a real focus on how we reduce poverty, particularly energy poverty here in the province. We have some of the largest or highest electricity rates in the country, and considering we are currently in a cost of living crisis, that has had some impacts to folks here in the province as well. And so we are very cognizant of that and trying to ensure that whatever we're doing minimizes any impacts to ratepayers, as well as thinking about future upward pressures from other sort of fossil fuel markets, carbon taxes, et cetera. So we're making sure that the transition is cognizant of those things as well. We really are focused on building connected, safe, and resilient communities that support healthy populations. So you'll see in the clean building side, as well as the transportation side, that's often a really key objective, as well ensuring that from our perspective on the electricity side, that we really try to create choice. We try to create opportunity well, I don't know what's happening, but we're going through a bunch of slides. There we go. Thank you. We're really looking at choice for everyone, from a homeowner right up to the largest industrial customers that we have here. We want everyone to have a pathway to choose renewable electricity. And some of the programs that we've been working on the last several years have really been focused on that breadth of choice. So the motivators that's sort of driving all of these things here in Nova Scotia are around some objectives that we have in the Environmental Goals and Climate Change Reduction Act, or EGCRA. So we have a commitment to reduce our GHG emissions by 53% from 2005 levels, and that is by 2030. We're aiming to achieve net zero emissions in Nova Scotia from all sectors by 2050. We need to supply Nova Scotia's electricity grid with renewable energy in the amount of 80% by 2030. So that's the near-term target I'm really driving towards with a lot of the procurement, as well as phase out of coal by 2030. So that phase out, of course, will require a little bit beyond just generation, but of course, considerations for how we reliably integrate all of these different technologies as part of that transition. There are a few other targets I'm just going to mention quickly that are in the climate plan. One is in and around having 500 megawatts of local domestic renewable energy procured and supplied by 2026. That includes in the climate plan a target of 50 megawatts from community solar, and also commits the province to participating in the Green Choice program and the launch of that program by 2023. Next slide, please. So if anyone is from Nova Scotia or has been paying attention to the news here in the last few weeks, we were able to release a clean power plan maybe about 2 weeks ago now to the public. And this is just a really high level overview. Unfortunately, the formatting on this slide seems to be a little wonky, but it really does look at new energy resources for the province, and it really is focused on building out the local domestic renewable energy. So that's both with wind and solar. We have a commitment to another 1,000 megawatts of wind. That does include the 350 megawatts that is allocated for Green Choice, as well as it comes through in other programs, whether that is net metered solar, residential solar, community solar, as well as sort of the utility scale procurements. There's also an opportunity here for designated projects under sort of sleeve and backstop PPAs. So that would include all of those different avenues. Solar is about 5% of the total there, just coming in a little bit under wind, of course. We have some of the best wind resource in Canada, if not North America. So we like to take advantage of that as well. Some of the other tools that we're looking at is to start smart grid management tools. So upgrading and modernizing the grid, as well as ensuring those technologies like, for example, battery storage are there to help us as part of that transition. And then really looking in and diving in on resiliency and reliability, both from a climate change adaptation perspective, but also for customer reliability to make sure the transmission system is providing quality services. And we have all of the things that we need to ensure that base power or fast acting generation for the peak demands that happen here in the province. So next slide, please. A little bit about Nova Scotia's energy market, if you're not currently familiar. So Nova Scotia's energy market is a regulated market. It is regulated by the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, or the UARB. Largely, the utility here in Nova Scotia is the Nova Scotia Power Incorporated, which provides about 95% of the electricity. They are a privately owned, vertically integrated monopoly utility. That's a lot of words, but basically, you know, they're privately owned. We did here in the province back in the early 90s sell our utility to a private entity, which is Nova Scotia Power, which is a subsidiary of Emera. They are vertically integrated, meaning they own all of the, not all, but they own a majority of the generating assets. So a lot of the coal plants, for example, or other fossil fuels, as well as some of the renewable energy is owned by Nova Scotia Power. And they're a monopoly because they provide 95% of the electricity. There is a 5% that is provided by smaller municipal electric utilities. There are sort of 3 or 4 that are currently active in sort of procuring and owning generation assets and providing power to their customers, and there are others that are just taking full service from Nova Scotia Power. In terms of what the motivations or the drivers are, of course, we're working with all of the key interested parties and the partners that are required here, but the climate change legislation, policy, and programs are largely driven by government. So that's myself as well as my colleagues over at Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change. Next slide, please. A little bit of a overview. I know particularly here in Nova Scotia, I get this question quite a bit about like who does what in terms of the market here in Nova Scotia. So a quick overview, and I'm happy to answer questions as much as I can about how this works. But the roles and responsibilities from government, the board, and Nova Scotia Power are different. So government tends to set, policy objectives. We would amend legislation or the laws that govern the public utility, as well as any of the programs that we do under the Electricity Act, the Public Utilities Act, for example. We would create the programs or the incentives that really drive people in the direction of this transition to renewable energy. The Utility and Review Board has sort of direct oversight over the utility, as well as other utilities, not just the electric utility. They're there to force those laws to make sure that there are processes in place and sort of operate similar to a court system. It's a judicial body. So, there are hearings, you must bring forth evidence as part of that hearing, and then a ruling or a decision is made by the board related to whatever the issue or the matter is before the board. Nova Scotia Power, as I mentioned, is a subsidiary of Emera. They operate as the majority, monopoly utility here in Nova Scotia. They own some of the generation. They would own the lines and the facilities that have generation. They maintain the system operations and really are the folks behind making sure that when you flick a switch, of course, the power comes on. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the Green Choice Program. The Green Choice Program, just as a quick introduction, has been sort of in development and design since roughly about 2021. Prior to that, I think we've been discussing an idea or a concept in and around a green tariff program in Nova Scotia since 2019. So it has been a long time in the making, and has taken a lot of time, a lot of engagement, a lot of thought and intentional thought behind the development of this program. Next slide, please. So a little bit, I guess, a peek behind the curtain as to the motivators behind why we chose sort of a green tariff model for Nova Scotia. We have these big lofty energy goals. We know that we have some near-term targets around getting to 2030 and reducing our GHG emissions, as well as transitioning to renewable energy and getting off coal. This program provided one of the key mechanisms to sort of enable us to go out for procurement, enable us to provide what some of our interested parties were looking for, which is really around that title to renewable energy, as well as, supporting the overall transition of the system. Stakeholder needs. So it started off with some conversations with the federal government, as well as Dalhousie University, who were really keen on trying to find an avenue to meet their own corporate needs around having 100% renewable electricity for all of their facilities and operations here in Nova Scotia. So through those conversations, it really drove us to sort of consider our options, introduced us to Coho climate advisors, and then we started having some conversations about what this could look like in Nova Scotia. There are lots of interested parties that have come through, both in a previous sort of expression of interest way back in 2021, as well as we did another one in earlier this year, in May of this year. And so there is quite a bit of interest, so that helped me to sort of say this program was needed. It was, people were ready, they were excited for it, and I was able to get the regulations for this program up and running in August of this year. Some of the other considerations, of course, is that there are other alternatives. The Renewables retail program is actually similar, but different enough in how it operates, that it wasn't really it is a relatively poor alternative. Hadn't really seen a whole lot of uptake. Only in recent years have we had one retail licenser come through and be approved by the board. That program itself is actually run by Nova Scotia Power and is not run by the government, so a little oversight from our end. But it does mean that there are alternatives, and it is certainly a possibility for some folks who are looking for options. The other thing, of course, is that the system here in Nova Scotia is still pretty carbon intense. Somewhere between 50 and 60% right now is still heavily reliant on coal and natural gas. So how did this happen, or what do we do? We introduced some amendments to the Electricity Act in February 2020. I also did a few small administrative amendments last winter as well, just to tweak some of the language based on learnings from engagement in the previous year. The regulations were drafted and designed based on the engagement and based on the information and program design that was not just best practice in North America, but also considered the Nova Scotia context, as well as some of the feedback we heard from interested parties. So at a really high level, what is a green tariff program, since this is the first of its kind in Canada for anyone who isn't sort of familiar with how this works? Generally, the idea here is that you have a utility, and typically in other sort of regulated markets, it's often the utility that would be leading this program and not the government. In this jurisdiction, it just so happens that it's us. So you have a new renewable resource that would be built. How that happens in other jurisdictions depends on which jurisdiction. In ours, it's a competitive procurement process that's led by the government, but is independently managed by Coho Climate Advisors. They are our appointed procurement administrators. So new renewable energy is built, that electricity goes through to the utility. The renewable attributes are transferred from the project to the utility, and the utility is able to register and retire those renewable energy certificates on behalf of the interested participants. So it gives a participant, or the end user here, that piece of paper that says, I have X amount of energy that was renewable, and allows folks to meet any corporate commitments around GHG emission reductions. Similarly, as a participant, you continue to be a customer of your regular utility and just continue to pay your bill as a regular customer. In this case, we just have a rider or an add-on that would be specific to the Green Choice program. Next slide, please. This is a really busy slide, and I say this to most of my folks when I'm doing this webinar. Just excuse me for 1 second while I take another drink of water. But I'll do my best to try to dive into what this looks like or what it means. So this is just an expansion of sort of how this works in Nova Scotia versus some other ways that it might work in other places. So up here in the gray, you have sort of a business as usual. So you are a customer of your utility, you are a electricity customer, and you continue to consume electricity just as it is, as you would normally. Click on your lights, you run your machines, you do all your heating or whatever it might be, and that remains the same. So you get electricity service from utility. There are costs associated with that as a customer, and those remain exactly the same. So that's what we refer to as business as usual. So all of your rates that are set by the Utility and Review Board here in Nova Scotia, those remain exactly the same and untouched as a result of your participation here in this program. Your electricity is similarly provided by your utility. I will get to that. Thank you, Cynthia. It continues to be provided. The Green Choice program, which is here in the blue, is sort of a rider or in addition to your business as usual. So the new renewable energy asset actually gets built. So it's brand new, it is net new, so that you can point to those projects as a reliable source of new renewable energy. It is produced and given to the grid. The cost of the power purchase agreement, or the contract between the utility and the project itself, is a commercial contract that governs sort of the sale of that electricity. And in this case, in Nova Scotia, that cost is actually transferred to all customers, which would include all participants in the Green Choice Program, but is not just set aside for the Green Choice Program participants. As I mentioned, the renewable energy attributes from the renewable energy projects sort of are detached, transferred to the utility, and the utility has a system and are currently in the process of bringing on an independent auditor who will sort of review this process for this program as well as other programs we have here in Nova Scotia, and provide the renewable energy certificates to folks who either request them in other programs, or in this case, will be required to pass them on to the end user, customer, buyer. In this case, we call them participants. All the same thing. The key here is in and around what the rider is, or what the cost is, and the credit is to the participants. So your bill will look exactly the same. You will have 2 new line items based on your participation in the Green Choice Program. One is a cost. That cost is currently capped in regulation. So that is $1 per megawatt hour, up to the total of $100,000 per participant per year. And that per megawatt hour is based on your actual consumption. The GCP credit is actually depends on your subscription to the program. So if you are subscribing 100% of your electricity, then 100% of your electricity is actually avoiding any carbon tax, because you're taking generation from only renewable energy sources. You have a process in place that says so, and can be audited and can prove that. So it means that you get to avoid the carbon tax on your electricity bill. The exact cost is not yet known. However, it is anticipated to be somewhere. I'm going to give a rough number. Please do not hold me to this, because it is not yet certain. It's somewhere between $1.5 per megawatt hour and $2 to $3 per megawatt hour. That's going to vary quite a bit over the term of the next 5 years. And again, we only have certainty on those costs until 2030. Anything above that and beyond that, I am unable to predict, because we don't know what that regulatory market looks like. But give or take, in some years, this might look like roughly a cost neutral to most participants, i.e. you're not going to pay any more on your electricity bill, but you might receive a minor benefit, or maybe some cases it might be a little bit more of a benefit in some years. Again, that is all based on your consumption, and the credit is applied to your electricity bill. It'll be trued up based on your regular billing cycle. I think that's everything from this slide, so we can move on to the next one, please. So, as I mentioned, the power purchase agreement cost, so there is a fixed price that typically shows up in the contract between the project and the utility, and that price will actually support all customers, which will include customers in Green Choice. That's just to allow everyone to benefit from sort of the overall cost reductions, and to help to mitigate some of those upward rate pressures that are coming in from fossil fuel markets. So this is a fuel switch out. That's how it works here in Nova Scotia. In addition, the assets also allow us to achieve our renewable energy targets. So the new renewable energy will count towards the 80% renewable energy target we have by 2030. It'll also count towards our GHG emission reductions here in Nova Scotia. So that allows us to do that. The way it works here in Nova Scotia is actually calculated on sales volume. So the utility files a report based on their sales volume, and that's how we sort of capture what is happening on the renewable energy side and sort of fuel overall in Nova Scotia. This also, of course, as we transition the electricity system, allows us to mitigate impacts to the carbon tax that will apply here. In Nova Scotia, it is actually an output based pricing system. The regulations have been drafted. They are available. Again, as I mentioned, the costs are still being sort of projected, and my intent is to work with the utility to make sure that those are available in advance of the application opening so that participants are certain, or at least have some numbers they can run based on their known electricity consumption and try to figure out, give or take, what's going to cost and what kind of benefit might I see on my electricity bill. As I mentioned, it might be a benefit in some years. It might be a little bit of a cost. It might be neutral. It'll likely vary quite a bit in the first couple of years until these projects come online. The other key thing to mention here is that customers will not be required to pay anything, nor will they receive any benefit until those renewable electricity projects are operational. And so until they hit commercial operation, which currently for this program and for this competitive process is likely to be somewhere between 2026 and 2028. We have some projects in the queue that I'm aware of that are a little bit more advanced, but the procurement has not yet been conducted. So those projects have not yet been selected. And so they could come in sometime between 2026 and 2028. Next slide, please. This is just a really high level overview of sort of how this process works here for the program. So back in sort of April, May, we did an expression of interest for the participants. It was not required, so please don't worry if you did not participate in that expression of interest. It was mostly just to help me to understand, what the volume of interest is, what kind of challenges I might foresee in terms of setting up an application process that required you to have all of your, electricity accounts, especially if you are the government of Canada and you have multiple departments or agencies and accounts and buildings across so many facilities, similar to the province. And just try to get an idea when folks needed it by, whether it was in the near term, 2025 or 2030, and see what I can do in terms of trying to meet any of those goals, or at least let folks know that perhaps I'm not going to have it for you by 2025, but the program will be launched, we'll have a process in place, we'll have award, so you have certainty that it's happening. As I mentioned, sort of the processes are dual here. So we have a program application that's happening on the participant side. That application is due to come out in December of this year. It's going to be relatively straightforward. It's really just looking at, your energy consumption, any corporate commitments you have for climate change mitigation, ESG goal, or any sort of greenhouse gas emission reductions, and any timelines that you're operating on, because that's key to me being able to sort through the information there. That application will come through actually to the department. So myself and a soon to be hired and soon to start coordinator will be helping me out with some of that process. The minister is the one who decides on who gets accepted into the program, and a notice on that will be sort of sent on to the utility. On the alternative side and on the supplier side is a request for proposal. So that's a competitive process that is transparent, fair, competitive, and must provide the best value to ratepayers in terms of how the projects get selected. A draft of the documents, which would be the RFP as well as the commercial contract, the power purchase agreement, was released in August. We accepted feedback up until September, and we are now currently reviewing some of that feedback to be able to make amendments or changes to the documents as a result of that feedback. So as I mentioned, on either side, there are governing documents after sort of you've applied and the RFP has been open. We have the power purchase agreement. That's the one between the utility and the project. And then on the participant side, we have our participant agreement. Still sorting out sort of the standard terms and conditions, hoping to have a draft available again by the time the application is open, so folks have an idea of what kinds of terms and conditions you're looking at. But at a really high level, I'll just mention that, there is opportunity in there, and that's built into the regulations to ensure that there are ways to amend, as you are in the program and maybe you have added new facilities or you've installed a whole bunch of EV charging infrastructure to your facilities, then there's an ability where there is program availability to make an adjustment in an upward way. But similarly, there's also a way to make it in a downward way. So for example, maybe you have decommissioned a building, or you have installed significant amounts of maybe done a huge retrofit for some of your buildings, and that's brought the energy use in that building quite down, then there's also a mechanism to bring it down. So it's just a high level overview of sort of the governing documents. The participant agreement right now, we're still in discussion as to whether or not that's going to be a separate document, or it might be something that maybe gets updated in your regular customer terms and conditions that already exist with the utility. Thank you. Next slide. So everyone might be asking the question, well, who's eligible? And the short answer is pretty much everybody. And that was an intentional design to try to keep this as open as possible. So whether you are a government entity, and that can include all of your departments, agencies, crowns, authorities, boards, basically if you have a governing structure within the government that reports to a minister or an elected official, that sort of allows you to come in as the government of Canada or the province of Nova Scotia or the municipality. You could be the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia or a wholly owned subsidiary. Could be a registered charity or a charitable organization that's registered here in Nova Scotia. Could be a public school, school authority, or any of the post-secondary institutions, whether you're a college or a university, but you have to be a public one. Or the hospital or the hospital authorities here in Nova Scotia as well. From a private perspective, it can be a commercial, industrial, corporate business that's registered here in Nova Scotia, and it can be pretty much anyone. I will get into sort of the details in the next slide, but also from a large sort of eligibility perspective, of course, you can be a new or existing customer of Nova Scotia Power. So it has to be within Nova Scotia Power's service territory. So that would eliminate that 5% I mentioned within the municipal electric utilities. So if you're one of your buildings as an entity exists in that jurisdiction, that's one of the facilities we wouldn't be able to consider through this program. All of your electricity accounts must be, of course, with Nova Scotia Power. So that's within their service territory. Sort of the accounts must be in good standing with Nova Scotia Power. So that just means it's up to date. There's no like major red flags in terms of, your account is in arrears or anything like that. And we'll be working with Nova Scotia Power to identify that after the application has been deemed to be complete. There might also be some form of a credit check or a credit rating agency that's likely only to apply to any sort of new applicants. So whether it's either you're doing an expansion and you want to enroll brand new load, or perhaps it's a brand new entity to Nova Scotia, like a new business, then that might be something that would apply to you as part of your application. Next slide, please. So deeper dive a little bit into sort of the eligibility criteria. So as I mentioned, if you are a corporate or institutional customer, one of the key pieces that is part of the eligibility criteria that is not sort of amenable is your consumption must be at 10,000 megawatt hours per year. So give or take, that is usually a rate class 10 or above from a corporate perspective here in Nova Scotia. And that's one single account, or if you are sorry, my cat is meowing in the background. If you are currently operating sort of multiple locations across multiple regions here in Nova Scotia, then also you can bring in all of those things as long as it's the same corporate structure that is applying to this program. So I provided a rough sort of example here. So if you are clearwater fishing, fish processing, and you have 6 processing plants located across Nova Scotia with a total energy consumption across all 6 of those locations of 32,000 megawatt hours per year, yes, please apply. If you are a single corporate or institutional customer, so this is either sort of meant for the government of Canada or one manufacturing facility that has could have multiple accounts, or it might just be one. Again, all of those put together could be 10,000 megawatt hours or more. So I'd like to use the government of New Caledonia and all of its departments, like the Department of Fisheries, or an agent like the New Caledonia Tourism Agency, or any of the Crown corporations like Invest New Caledonia, or any of its wholly owned subsidiaries. If they come in at above that 10,000 megawatt hour per year mark, then yes, please apply. The separate public institutions, so this is an aggregation mechanism, and it allows other sort of separate or different public institutions to apply as an aggregate partnership. and it's only available to public institutions. It is not available to corporate customers or commercial customers. So in this case, what do I mean by different public institutions? I mean the municipality, a registered charity. I mean, a university or an education center that's located all sort of within the same region, just typically because that makes the most sense. But there's no reason why multiple municipalities couldn't do the same thing here. The only key difference here is that each customer that's within the aggregate has to reach that 1,000 megawatt hour per year limit to be able to be part of the partnership. And of course, that total partnership or that total aggregate must reach that 10,000 megawatt hour per year limit. So this again is just to be conscientious and try to provide as many opportunities and choices to folks from across all kinds of walks of life here in Nova Scotia. So the example, of course, is that, you could be the municipality of Acadia, the town of Acadia, the Evangeline University, Acadia Regional Center for Education, or the Acadian Food Bank. As long as you reach that 1,000 megawatt hour per year as an individual customer, you can aggregate to that total and apply. There are certain things, of course, that will apply different to the aggregation than would be the others, but for the most part, it's really just about that sort of minimum 10,000 megawatt hour per year. Okay, next slide, please. This deals mostly with like the supplier side or the project developer side. So I know there are a few of you on the line here today. So these are independent power producers. This procurement is not available to the utility, so it is only sort of the independent power producers that are eligible to participate in an RFP. It is a competitive process that's conducted, as I mentioned, by an independent procurement administrator, which is Coho Climate Advisors, who operate out of Maryland in the United States. We've released, as I mentioned, a draft request for proposals as well as a power purchase agreement, have accepted feedback and are currently reviewing that feedback and making adjustments to those documents with the anticipated timeline of having that released or open for bids by December 1st of 2023. The close of that agreement is give or take, so the bids should be in, I believe right now, it continues to change, and I'm not 100% sure, so please double check on the website. I think it's April of next year that those bids would close, as well as then there would be sort of a 3-month review period, and then awards are made, and then a give or take 90 days to execute the contracts, so the power purchase agreements. So we should have sort of a final list of projects or awards made by next summer, and sort of late summer, early fall, I should have the power purchase agreements executed for the projects that proceed. So similarly, just want to mention on the applicant side, my intent is to try to open these two processes at the same time. There might be a small delay on the participant side just because it's taken me a little bit longer to get a coordinator on to help out with this part of things than I anticipated. So I am really driving it towards December, but it might be a little delayed from that December 1st timeline. The power purchase agreement in Nova Scotia is a standard power purchase agreement. There's little sort of amendability after the board has approved it. There is some, but not a lot in terms of sort of the standard form. So it makes it really important to participate in the feedback process that has been happening, as well as it does have to go to the utility and review board for approval, and that doesn't usually involve sort of a hearing and a feedback process. So there are opportunities at that stage as well to continue to provide any feedback or advice or evidence, which is really key to the board, and as they make their sort of judicial decision about the standard form. Both of these documents and processes are building upon sort of the recent success with rate-based procurement, but also taking the lessons learned from that process. Since it was the first time we've done that procurement in about a decade, there were lots of lessons learned. So I'm trying to take those things, a lot of feedback that we've heard from industry, as well as other sort of internal folks within government, communities, and really incorporate that to just improve the process and to make sure that it is iterative, we continue to innovate, and we continue to be responsive to Nova Scotians. The electricity that's generated is supplied to Nova Scotia Power, and then Nova Scotia Power, of course, as the utility, will supply it to the customer. As I mentioned, the renewable energy attributes are transferred through the PPA to Nova Scotia Power. They are registered and retired in the participant's name. And in this case, in case anyone's not familiar with what retired means, it does mean that they are no longer available for any further market transaction. So you will get proof that you have renewable energy in the amount that you have subscribed to the project, but it will not be available for resale, basically. Next slide, please. So that kind of brings me to the end of sort of the overview of the Green Choice program. I do have some additional information in the appendix in case it comes up if you guys want to dive into the details, but I really wanted to make sure I had time for questions. So this at a really high level is just some of the other options or opportunities that exist here in Nova Scotia for renewable energy. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly, but really happy to dive into more detail around some of these. Some of them aren't me, so I will do my best to answer the questions. It's likely it might be another colleague of mine, or in some cases, it's Nova Scotia Power that leads the program. So, so those questions might be best directed there. So net metering, we have sort of tiers in the way that it is governed at a residential level. So if you are a homeowner and you are a residential customer, you're allowed to build up to 27 kilowatts of solar on your rooftop as self-generation, and there is no oversight from Nova Scotia Power outside of what's required for sort of electricity code to make sure that it's up to code. Otherwise, there's no sort of approvals or application process necessarily. It is really, it is as a right. So you have a right to self-generate in Nova Scotia from renewable energy as a residential customer. The commercial net metering, and that includes both sort of the two others that are listed here, are done by Nova Scotia Power. It does have oversight from them, and there are programs in place that have been approved by the board. So if you are a commercial entity in Nova Scotia, you can build up to 200 kilowatts of self-generation through net metering, or if you are a large commercial customer, and the key here is if you have a demand charge on your electricity bill, that will allow you to build up to 1 megawatt of self-generation. In Nova Scotia, net metering is at a 1-to-1 ratio. So i.e. what you pay for that electricity is what you're going to get back in terms of your credit. So if you're paying this much, then you're going to get back, you're going to be paid that much for the generation as it goes back and forth within the grid. Community solar is a new program that is sort of being developed in tandem or alongside of Green Choice from my colleague Julia. It is a program that is designed specifically, our tagline is Netflix for solar. It is meant to allow any customers who do not currently have or own their roof to be able to put solar up. If you are, a condo or a, a renter in an apartment, you don't own your house, or your roof is really shaded, all of those reasons might mean that you cannot actually put solar on your own roof. So this will build a project sort of independently and separately from you, and you're allowed to subscribe up to the amount that you would need for your own consumption. So projects will be built through the program. The minister decides on who gets accepted into the program and issues a power purchase agreement to the project itself. And then the project will allocate the subscriptions based on interested customers within the province. The projects right now are currently proposed at 10 megawatts, and the program is currently capped at 100 megawatts. I will add the caveat that the regulations for this program have not yet been approved, so they are subject to change based on government decision. My colleague Julia, of course, has been engaged with folks directly about this program and just recently released sort of a frequently asked questions. So if anyone is interested and has not yet received that communication, I'm happy to direct you in her direction, and you can get up to date on what's happening on that side. The other key piece there is that it really is meant to provide benefits to communities here in Nova Scotia. Anyone who's familiar with sort of the ComFit program that ran back in sort of 2012, 2015, it really is meant to provide sort of that accessibility and benefit to communities, particularly looking at low to moderate income households. So making sure that even those who may be the capital cost of putting solar on your roof, or the capital cost of participating or accessing renewable energy is sort of out of the reach of some folks, we want to make sure that there is still an avenue available to them as a customer of the utility. So it is driven in that direction, and project decisions are likely to be made based on those kind of components. The other piece, or the other couple ones I want to just hopefully mention quickly, because I do see I'm running into time and I want to make sure everyone has time to ask questions. So there is a behind the meter opportunity. So that just means that you can build a renewable energy project, technology agnostic here. But the cost, of course, is at the cost of the person building it and the facility that it's going to serve. So if you want to put a wind turbine, probably not. If most likely you want to build like some solar and you have a ground mount system or a rooftop system, you can directly connect that to the facility, but do not directly connect it to the grid. Still have to contact Nova Scotia Power, follow the interconnection procedures that they have in place to make sure, of course, that the project meets all of their requirements, but you can directly build it, directly connect it, and not interact with the grid to offset your own energy use and still have access to any of the renewable energy you would like. The renewable to retail program, there is no limit to the behind the meter program at this time, but it should be sized to the facility because you're not able to sell it, right? So there's no reason to no motivation and no reason to oversize it because you're not that energy would just get spilled. The renewable to retail program is a program that, as I mentioned, no problem, Jason, is a program provided by Nova Scotia Power, and the retail licenses are approved by the Utility and Review Board. There's only one retail provider or retail license that has been issued so far. That's to Roswell Developments. They are actively pursuing this program. They're making great advancements. They already have their EA, for example, that's been approved. So they are out there and are building it. And it allows, again, just a sort of a direct producer to provide electricity directly to a customer through a service agreement. Nova Scotia Power and the board sort of sets the rates or the tariffs that operate within this program. So that is not set by the government, but instead set by Nova Scotia Power. And my understanding is that they can be variable depending on the sort of the overall market and different things. So I'm not 100% sure on this one. I do have some information if anyone's really interested. I'm happy to send it along, but it is a program operated by the utility. And then last but not least here is a relatively new avenue for designated projects. So right now, actually, we are amending two clauses or two components of the Electricity Act. One is, we call it 4AA, and the other is 4D. 4AA speaks to renewable energy projects that are designated projects that can be designated by the minister, as well as, designated by Executive Council. And the 4D speaks to designated projects for battery storage. So it is a limited opportunity. We're not hoping to accept a whole lot of folks through this avenue, since only a few folks could probably be at advanced stage of readiness, or either at this point where they would be large enough to be an off-taker under these kind of agreements. These are sleeve or backstop PPAs. Quickly, for anyone that isn't particularly familiar with what a sleeve or backstop PPA is, a sleeving arrangement is literally the same kind of structure in many ways as Green Choice. So you have a renewable energy project, and that could be owned by a similar or subsidiary of the buyer. You build a renewable energy project, there's a PPA that gets issued that allows you to sell the electricity to the utility using the utility infrastructure, and then the utility sells that back to the end user or the customer. And it's a three-way contract that sort of allows that energy to be sold and then resold back to the end customer. A backstop PPA is more, it's more of a financial tool, and it just allows anyone who would be already planning to build maybe a behind the meter, or was considering a behind the meter option, or had another avenue to build renewable energy. It offers the ratepayer, where it is in the interest of the ratepayer, an opportunity to be the last resort off-taker. So if you already have customers signed up, you already have off-take agreements, and your project is fully allocated, but somewhere during that contractual term, somebody cancels their subscription, or maybe they go out of business, or some sort of trigger there that takes away that energy, it allows the PPA to kick in, and then all ratepayers would become the off-taker of that agreement. As I mentioned, this is really driven as a limited opportunity. It is meant for sort of larger entities in Nova Scotia above and beyond the 10,000 megawatt for Green Choice. And it really must be determined to be in the best interest of ratepayers. So it must provide benefit, i.e. must be at a competitive cost. And of course, considerations are given to the attributes, so the renewable energy, and if that's going to help us meet our renewable energy goals. So this is just one more mechanism that allows additional choice. It allows the opportunity to expedite the transition, as well as provide folks with the opportunity to directly build their own, and gives them sort of that financing tool to make sure that you're receiving the best sort of terms and conditions with your lender. So that's just a quick overview of some of the other opportunities here in Nova Scotia from an electricity perspective. Of course, we offer lots of different other programs that are more grant funding and focused at a community or municipal level. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the end of my presentation so far. Thanks to everyone so much for listening to me ramble on now for almost an hour. And I am happy to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. I do want to say for everyone, this is recorded and it's going to be on the BRC website and publicly available. So if you want to go back and maybe stop and re-listen a couple times to get into some of those details, because Leigh-Anne, you had a lot of information for us there, and that was
I
amazing.
know.
No,
I tend to also speak quickly. So yeah, absolutely. If anything wasn't clear, please just tell me, folks, and I'm happy to go back.
Oh, it was great. I meant that more as like this is going to be a great resource for people to go back to as they're thinking about Nova Scotia. So what I want to say is we did collect some questions ahead of the event, and some are getting put into the chat. I have a few I want to start off with the conversation. So if anybody on the call wants to take this opportunity to put some questions in the chat, I will get to them in a second here. For the first question, we had some like looking at from the buyers. So can you clarify some of the, we had a question around RECs in terms of like how are they generated and what is permitted as far as transferring? So can a project like can sorry, like an off-taker under this transfer or sell their RECs to another entity? That was one question.
No, so the attributes are fully allocated in the power purchase agreement to the utility. All of that energy is registered to the participants in the program and then retired on behalf of the participant in that sort of auditing sort of certification process, meaning that they are not available for any further market transactions. So you cannot resell them.
Okay, perfect. Looking at it, oh, sorry. Looking at the developer side for a second here, can you provide a little more info on how the projects will be selected? Is there a specific mix of generation you guys are looking at, or are there any notable project requirements to highlight? So we see in other jurisdictions, community consultation or reclamation considerations. And just could you go into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So the RFP documents are currently available online. The draft is available online on the website that is listed on the things here, and I'm happy to share or overview the process. So there are minimum criteria that folks must meet. Mostly it's around sort of technical requirements, making sure you're a renewable energy project, making sure that you're located in Nova Scotia. There is a project cap of 150 megawatts. Those are the kinds of things that you would see in the minimum criteria. And if you do not meet the minimum criteria, you would not be able to proceed. One thing that is new for this year is in and around applicants that are applying for generation equipment or major equipment, and that is described in the documents, what exactly that means. They are not eligible, or we cannot consider them for application under the Green Choice Program if you are located on Crown land for those assets. This is a sort of a temporary measure, while the province is also conducting how it will meet its land protection targets of 20% by 2030 as well. So that process is just a little bit behind some of the procurement processes I'm leading, and those final decisions on what that will look like is still taking place. Some of that land is likely going to be Crown land, and until that decision is made, of course, we want to make sure that we can meet both of our targets of reducing greenhouse gases as well as meeting our land protection targets. Some of the other key considerations, the major component, and this component is in law, is that it must provide best value to ratepayers, so meaning the price in the competition so after the minimum criteria, is a scored criteria. In that score criteria, price is the main or the most heavy weighted component of the scoring matrix. After that, there are components in and around community engagement, and by community, it means the general public or those most immediately adjacent to those projects or most likely to be impacted by those projects, as well as the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia. There's also a partnership opportunity in the RFP for partnerships with the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia. And you receive additional points if you are in a majority ownership structure versus a minority ownership structure, as well as the more communities that can be brought into the fold in terms of that partnership, whether it is from 1 to the 13, which is how many band councils are here in Nova Scotia, then you receive more points, the more the more communities you bring into that partnership. The other key piece.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. And it actually, the same mechanism was in the rate-based procurement, and it resulted in all projects being majority owned by the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia, with several projects that included, all 13 bands, which is great because that means that those benefits flow back to the Mi'kmaq. The other key components around are technical, so it's just making sure that you have the minimum requirements for resource assessments, and the competition is open to both wind and solar projects. It is there's currently a price cap proposed in the rate-based procurement, in the Green Choice program, and there are other components in and around community engagement. They're new to this process and to this competition is that we have hired, I mean Coho Climate Advisors, not me, the government, have hired a local community consultant that is just there to sort of verify and validate sort of what's happening on the ground in terms of community engagement, really meant to sort of listen to community concerns as well as review proponent activities and making sure that, the documents and evidence that's submitted as part of the proposal can be backed up with sort of ground truthing. I'm sure I'm missing something, but at this point I'm forgetting. And the other pieces in and around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as a minimum criteria, there's also a requirement for folks to have some form of diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of plan, publicly stated plan, or sign up to one of the federal programs that is inclusive of your governance structure. And there are additional components or points allocated for sort of economic and social benefits. So looking to the Nova Scotia supply chain and plans to access and utilize the Nova Scotia supply chain, as well as provide any sort of benefits to communities through benefits agreements or other sort of arrangements, whether that is grants, scholarships, capacity building, training, any of those kinds of things that flow directly back to the communities. Those are also part of the scored mechanism.
That's amazing. It's one of the reasons I love having Leigh-Anne on webinars is you get a comprehensive breakdown of everything.
Almost like I've been living and breathing these things for several years now.
Yeah, I feel like your brain had a checklist there that you were like looking up into the sky and being like, okay, I have hit all of these. Oh no, yes. And there's another 2 sections.
Right.
I want to pull back, and then I'll get to the 2 questions in the chat here. So as we're at BRC, we're interested in seeing corporate procurement expand across the country. And honestly, it's really exciting for us that Nova Scotia, like a smaller maritime province, is leading as one of the provinces pushing forward on this. So yes. Thinking back on your time working on this project now, moving it forward, I kind of have a 2-part question. One, I know you said this kind of started conversations in 2019. So what was the impetus? Like, what was driving this from the government to say we want to enable corporate procurement? And then the second part of that is thinking over the course of the development of this. Were there any external events or influences that altered the trajectory of the program?
Because there's some really great questions. So back in, I would say 2019, one of the key drivers is actually the federal government's commitment in the 2016 Pan-Canadian framework to have all of their facilities and operations be supplied by renewable energy by 2020. Well, at the time, I think it was 2025. And then they later made a commitment that was a little bit earlier that unfortunately we weren't able to meet due to something called a pandemic. So that was one of the drivers that was sort of leading behind it. But also I will give a huge shout out to Dalhousie University, who was on the same trajectory and roughly the same timeline, who were asking us the same kind of questions and just looking for options. Both entities had kind of engaged with Nova Scotia Power. Nova Scotia Power didn't really see any programs or sort of tools or resources that they could pull from within the current and existing regulatory structure So that led us to develop or explore the opportunity for green tariffs. We did conduct a sort of a request for information before we appointed our procurement administrators, and then one of the key considerations in that was the expertise in designing green tariff programs. Coho Climate Advisors, formerly known as Customer First Renewables, have a lot of experience in mostly in the United States where these green tariff programs exist. So we pulled on their expertise to really understand sort of what best practice was, lots of cross-jurisdictional reviews to understand sort of the different options available to us and understand what is best for us. And then, of course, it was extensive engagement. So we did a lot of, talking both to the developers, suppliers, and interested participants to really make sure that the program we were designing and developing met their needs and was responsive to what those things that they were looking for. Some of the significant changes, for example, was, originally we were just thinking about, updating the electricity mix as part of the standard grid without creating any sort of recs that were required. But we heard loud and clear from the participants in the program, or the interested participants, that they really needed those certificates to say, of course, in international carbon accounting, you need something that proves you've met your corporate commitment. So that led us to do a bit of a redesign. Similarly, when we were talking about sort of costs, I will admit that the program as designed has been intentional, and it's intentionally designed both to alleviate some of those upward rate pressures that we are aware of from the fuel side, but also any carbon tax and carbon compliance costs, as well as it tends to be a little bit more favorable to the participant side than some of the other jurisdictions. The second question that you asked in and around some of the key things that might have changed. So under this program and from its original design or proposal in 2019, I've worked with, this will be the third premier and the 2 separate elected governments. And I think I've had 3, maybe 4 ministers in that time. So of course, as there are any changes in government or any sort of like shakeups like that, that does require us kind of going back to the folks, making sure everyone is on board. It involves maybe tweaking it to meet new government, platforms or initiatives and taking those things into consideration. So some of those things, unfortunately, have delayed the launch of this program over the last few years. The regulations as well have been adapted and tweaked and designed and redesigned so that when I was originally proposing this program, and the regulations actually were a lot more stringent and really sort of captured the program framework in a lot more restrictive way. And then in the last year or so, I've gone back through to try to alleviate some of those things and put those into the program to allow for a little bit more flexibility as well. We've been working really closely with Nova Scotia Power from the get-go to communicate, to consult, to understand their processes and to bring them on board and to fold them into like the application process, for example, to make sure that not only what I'm proposing is going to work and we can do it, but also to make sure that the timelines and the other components make sense, and to make sure that the verification processes are dual process and really try to keep those lines of communication open. The customer service team, I'm forgetting their exact title now, but customer service and innovation, I believe, is give or take their title, have been really great as part of this recent discussions and are really helpful. They're helping sort of folks gather their account information and all that stuff as well. So all of those things, of course, take time, a lot of lengthy discussion and effort, creating something that's new and novel that doesn't exist anywhere else in Canada. So I can't pull on any other jurisdiction in Canada. It's just, it's been a bit of a monster of an effort. So I appreciate everyone's patience because I feel like I've been talking about this program for quite some time. And I'm so excited that I finally get to launch it and I actually get to open applications and see this one through.
That's amazing. And I think you deserve a lot of credit for shepherding this across, 2 governments and 4 ministers. Now, probably the hardest question on this topic, if you could give one piece of advice to people working in jurisdictions across the country that are interested in this, but may not have the experience of just looking at it, what would you say?
I think the key piece is engage with the people. Make sure that they're talking and don't assume that you know what's best. Make sure that what you're designing works for the end users, works for the developers, works for communities, and really just talk to people to make sure that what's being proposed works and be open to that iterative process. Anytime you're trying something new, you are going to fail more often than you're going to succeed, and definitely learn from those failures, and incorporate that into the process. And I like to say fail small. So make sure that you're failing small and not failing big.
I think that's amazing advice. I do have a question, sorry, another buyer question on REC. So one thing that we have kind of seen in other jurisdictions is, and especially not in like a sleeve program, but like in Alberta's direct PPAs, one of the
Yeah.
benefits for buyers is being able to talk about a specific project. A great
Mhm.
example is the Traverse Solar Farm for Amazon, and then some
Right.
of the branding opportunities. In the Nova Scotia program, will participants be able to tie their electricity to specific projects as part of the program, or will it be bundled?
It's bundled, so it's a portfolio of the project. So each participant gets a percentage of
Mhm.
all of the projects. That way, it reduces the risk as a participant, so that if one project is offline for some reason, maybe there's a storm that comes through and knocks out, a couple turbines, or the entire site for that matter, who knows? Then that means they're still getting a portion of it from some other projects. You can still tie it directly to those projects, i.e. the projects that are awarded under Green Choice are specifically meant for and will be tied to the participants through the agreements that are in place. But it's not quite the same as what you're saying, where
Yeah,
you're,
so instead of referencing a
an
project, you
a
could
project,
reference a
you're
portfolio.
exactly.
Looking at the audience questions, I think so. One from Cynthia here is kind of around governance in the system and ensuring a separation between the operation of utilities or projects and elected officials. And I think that it kind of ties into. I noticed that in the Nova Scotia system across initiatives, it's the minister who decides. So I was wondering if you could speak to governance a little bit.
Sure. So the sort of twofold, because the program is twofold. So on the supplier side, anyways, that's part of the consideration and what part of the reason why we have the ability to appoint an independent procurement administrator to conduct the procurement on behalf of the government, and they are fully authorized to make a decision independent from government. In fact, once sort of bid opens, my role takes a significant step back. There is little to no communication between the procurement administrator and the government to make sure that they are fully able to make that decision independent from me and any influence on my side. Key, of course, is we share information that's relevant to any sort of points of clarity that might come up in the process. On the supplier case, on the participant side with the minister, the program is pretty straightforward in terms of the application. I'm really just looking at sort of the account information that you need, the publicly stated GHG emissions or any ESG stuff, and the timelines. It's really about, it's not a grant program. Like, I'm not going to be scoring people on their application. It's really about capacity and some of those key considerations around timelines and amounts. So it might look like things, or if someone's asking for 120%, which is available to be applied for, but I know that if I dial it back to 100%, I can add one or two more participants to the total. I might do that. So really the aim or the end objective here is to try to bring on as many people as possible within the 350 megawatt cap that I have to work within, and to try to provide as many people as possible with the electricity that they need through this program. So those are my end goals. Those are the considerations and decisions being made by the minister. In terms of applicants and that decision-making process, the final policy isn't quite in place yet, but again, it will be available in advance of the application process so that it is clear, it's transparent, and folks have the opportunity to understand sort of how that decision-making process happens.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. There's another question here. Now, I know from us talking that undersubscription is not the big worry here. But I do think it's a great question, especially as we look at later rounds. If there's not enough interest by participants, let's say you got to 250 or 300, would the generation RFP still continue, or what would that look like?
Correct. So the RFP will continue regardless of sort of the participation side, and I will either, again, I really am not concerned that it's going to come in at under a subscription. I'm anticipating it might be over subscribed, and I'll have the opposite problem. But in that case, if there is available capacity and I don't fully allocate it to all the participants, then I have the ability to run another intake round, give or take within the next year, or before those those projects become operational, to bring in that additional capacity. If for some reason I'm not able in subsequent intake rounds to fill it, then it would serve all customers.
Awesome. I do have to say that body language is an amazing thing, because you like pulled back 3 times, almost trying to laugh at the idea of like it's gonna be under. So
I know. Yeah,
that's, yeah.
you can read everything on my face. I have no poker face, like literally. It's all there.
Hey, when we're talking about an open and transparent system, that's a great quality to have. That kind of takes me to the end of the questions that I had and the questions in chat here. I think that this was an amazing session. Thank you so much for coming and
Of course.
speaking with our audience today. And I always say, if anybody has any additional questions, I'm always happy to pass them along. And I know Leigh-Anne is always happy
Yes.
to talk about the Green Choice program.
Always, always. And I will do a little shout out. Visit the website. It is updated regularly with timeline adjustments as they happen. There is an opportunity to sign up to the distribution list if you're not currently on it. And also there's an opportunity to just submit a question, and it will pop up on the frequently asked questions list, both for proponents, for general public, for participants. So we do try to make sure there are regular communications that are going out, and people's questions are being answered on a regular basis.
And when this video goes up on the BRC site, we'll make sure that there's
Yes.
a direct link to the program there for people to find easy.
Yep. And if you are an interested participant, reach out to me. If you are a supplier or a developer, reach out to Coho. That's sort of the divide of the program as it exists right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. One last opportunity. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our audience today?
No, again, I really appreciate the opportunity to highlight Nova Scotia and the work that we do here. Sometimes I do feel like you're right. We are a small province. I feel like we are consistently these days punching above our weight class. And, I have a great group of people that I work with and who are ridiculously supportive of the work that we do, and always are persistent and just keep trying. If we get a no, it's okay, let's try again. So we work really hard. I love to see the end result of the work that we do, but of course it's not possible without the hard work that's also happening on the ground with the developers who are out there making these projects happen, to the communities who are out there being engaged and participating, and of course to the participants who really drove the entire program, the entire development of this program. It is the reason why it exists. So thanks again to everyone for letting me do cool things.
Awesome. I've always thought Canada punches above its weight, so I think that it's only fitting that it's our provinces that are punching above to push us forward.
Yes.
With that, I'll just do the last. I'll take the rest of my 10 minutes from the beginning now, and I'll do a quick little upcoming events. So Margaret, next slide, please. So as I said, next week in October here, we have the Alberta Climate Summit. This is a public event for everybody. Like I said, topics range from jobs in transition to what a net zero grid really looks like, future of oil and gas, and carbon dioxide removal. It's going to be a great event, and I really encourage you to check it out. Next month, we at BRC are holding a buyers only webinar. So for any buyers that are still on the call, this one's going to go, it's called Legally Speaking. It's going to go into legal considerations and looking at that term sheet. And this is for like Alberta specific, more one-on-one projects here. But we're really looking forward to that. Next webinar, or next webinar, next slide, please. Thank you. And finally, again, I'm not joking when I say we could not do this without the amazing sponsors that we have at BRC. These are BRC developer members who are able to work with buyers in the membership to advance projects. And the other thing that they do is they provide expertise for webinars, and they also support the work. So just once again, EDF Renewables, Blue Earth Renewables, and Res Group, thank you so much for supporting our webinar series. And with that, I will leave our contact information up and I will unceremoniously end the webinar. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.